They can be shooty or stabby, tough, mean, and oh so nasty. But what they really are is fragile. Now, I love painting, obviously, but these are meant to be played with, toted around, touched and handled, knocked over and picked up to be looked at. So after all the work of painting them, it'll pay to protect them. And I don't mean by body checking anyone that gets close. I'm doing up a warband of Ratmen from One Page Rules. This month, I'm gonna do some of the monks with dual daggers, and a unit of grenadiers. The grenadiers, while they look amazing and I already want to protect them forever, they're gonna take a while to paint. So I'm just gonna focus on the monks in this video, since they're a bit simpler in painting terms while still being packed with style. I'm going to start right at the start, when it comes to some tips on how to protect 3D printed models. And I feel this first one is going to be a bit polarizing, but I don't always cure my minis, at least not all of a model. Flexibility can help to protect certain parts of a model. By having a little bit of give so that a part can bend before it snaps, it means it has a chance to survive a small impact. I'll show what I mean with some supports, the thinnest of the thin. These uncured supports bend and move, which means I can flick them all day and they won't snap. But if I cure it first, and I mean a good long baking, just a tiny bit of movement and snappity snap snap. So this is why I do selective curing. Things like bases, I'll cure the whole thing. They usually don't need the extra give and they make them more sandable. But things like swords and dangly bits, I'll either mask off before curing the rest of the model, or just not bother post-curing the model at all. As for the controversy around it, the vendor for the resin brand I use even says that a post-cure isn't necessary. And once washed of all the uncured resin, anything that keeps its shape technically is cured by definition, and it'll still keep that shape under the primer. So just make sure you clean them really well and cure anything you can't clean or are worried about. I like using this little UV flashlight for this, but it's not the end of a world if you leave a thin sword a little bit wiggly. Normally, those of us that 3D print can just print a model in its entirety, no need for glue at all. But when wanting to use the modular nature of some of them, it's going to take some putting together. I've seen it asked before around the internet, so I thought I'd mention it here, but superglue is what you use to glue resin miniature parts together. Plastic glue just doesn't work. I like to use a gel superglue to keep lots of control and not have it leak all around the model. But just like resin, superglue can become brittle and easily breakable too, so I like to give it the best chance to hold parts together with scoring. By taking a hobby knife and adding some grooves to the flat surface, it creates a texture and surface for the glue to get in and around and cling to. It won't stop it from breaking from a heavy impact, but it gives a more solid hold, which can help. I've shown this off before, but never with a rattle can, which is why I'm down here in my basement, because it's minus something below 0 Celsius out, and this is the only place I can spray for now. But what I'm showing off is a Tack Coat. Generally, spray can primers don't have a problem with beading, but for the sake of consistency, I like to do a Tack Coat, a fine spray of particles that blankets the model in some speckles, and letting it dry, which it does pretty quickly, before giving it a full spray. Wear the gloves for this one. It'll make the primer stick better to the surface of the model, which is the point of a primer. We want this layer to hold so that anything we paint on top of it doesn't chip or rub off. A Tack Coat helps with that adhesion. I guess since it's a painting video, I should show off a little bit of the painting. In my last video about painting journals, I showed off how I did the skin. I'll leave a link to that video in the description. So in this one, I'll show off how I do one of my main colors, the yellow. I'm keeping these rats easy, so it's only going to be a few layers of color. The first one I want something opaque, so I'm using raw sienna and mixing in some red oxide. It'll make a kind of light orange, but both of these paints are pretty opaque, so should go on in a few layers nicely. Someone once complimented me on being able to get a really smooth base coat. Well, I feel like some of that is because I do like to cheat a little. Using the brush got the paint in all the nooks, but this is still a bit splotchy in some of the flat areas. So my trick is to actually take my airbrush to it, with the same base coat color, and just fill in those flat areas a little bit better. The brush took care of the places that the airbrush can't get to, so what I'm doing is just evening out the flatter areas and avoiding getting too close to anything that might catch overspray. Airbrushes are just better at giving an even covering on a smooth surface. So yeah, it's a bit of a cheat, but it's also the best way I find to get smooth base coats. After the base coat though, things are getting substantially easier. Just a layer of pure raw sienna, no mixing needed. This is like a halfway between the orange and yellow, and is opaque while being transparent. So though going on it looks like too much, when it dries, it should easily look correct. For the last layer, I want a nice vibrant yellow, so I'm going to use a warm yellow, but this one might be a bit too warm and a bit too transparent, so I'm also adding yellow oxide to mellow it out. I'll take a brush with a nice point for this because I'm going to paint vertical lines in my highlight area, but then cross hatch them with horizontal lines. This is going to give me the look of a woven fabric, which on a cloak on a monk makes sense to have. After all the painting is done, the best way to protect your minis is going to be to seal them with a sealant. This is what they look like with just their paint jobs. So far, I've put nothing on them but paint. What I usually like to do before showing off a model in a video though is to give it a spray with an ultra matte varnish. The one I like the best for this is the Max Matte from Green Stuff World. Even cut with a bit of water to make it flow faster, this stuff has never gone cloudy, satin, or really anything. It's just a no problem, at least for me, maximum matte spray, like it says on the bottle. The problem is though that this is not a very heavy seal. It's about the thickness of a normal layer of paint. And while that works to change the finish, it's not going to stand up to the wear of repeated touching. Something that will give a much thicker sealing, but still be kinda matte, is a polyurethane varnish. But there is a trick to them. With the Max Matte, I barely had to shake it at all to get a perfect matte look. But if I only give the Poly Matte a quick shake, it's not going to come out looking matte, which is why I'm only showing off a test model here. You can see it finishes satin. So this bottle has to be really well shaken for a long time. I shook it for about 3 minutes before spraying my final rat with it. Just a bit of water with it in the airbrush. It comes out looking a little bit more matte when it's properly mixed up, but still with some sheen to it. But that is what protects the paint job, that thick layer of polymer. I'm in my basement again because the best seal I think you can actually get comes from one of these, a rattle can. Now it's in the same boat as the poly varnish in that even though it says matte on the label, it usually comes out more satin unless you give it a really long shake, and spray out some of the excess to get rid of the unmixed stuff that might still be in the nozzle, but at least getting it on the model is quick and easy. You can see just how much of a cocoon this surrounds the model in, which means this is going to take a lot of punishment from fingers and general play. But we still have the issue of the satin. It's protected, but shiny. Well, that's where the Max Matte comes back in. A quick, thin spray of that over the heavy spray can varnish, and it's back to velvet in no time, but now with a durable layer of protection under it. Please subscribe if you like this video, and check the link in the description to my Discord where I talk all sorts of nonsense about miniatures painting, provide critique on paint jobs, and occasionally stream.